So together we're going to paint a landscape, but it's not about painting the landscape as much as it's about learning the tools and the tricks and the skills that you need to know to learn the basic skills of acrylic painting. So the painting of the landscape is just a tool, if you will, in learning the basics of how to paint pretty much anything you want to paint. A lot of the skills are transferable to painting just about anything. So that's what we're going to do. So to paint this landscape, we're going to use primary colors, yellow, blue, and magenta, or you can use red. It's all good. They're both primary. This is just a variation on the red primary. And of course, we will need some white. And I'm also going to use raw umber or brown for those of you who are like, what the heck is raw umber? I really don't know. When you're painting, you always use more white than any other color. Well, white technically is not a color. It's a non-color. I don't know, but it's white. So I always put at least twice as much white on my palette as other colors. Sometimes 3 or 4 times as much. Probably just going to use blue and magenta and white for the first step. Some painters have a certain way they put paint on a palette. I'm not one of those painters. Whatever works, works for me. But what I did was do lots of white, some blue, some magenta, and also that's a little bit of raw umber or brown. So what I like to do first, right off the bat, is cover the entire canvas with a layer of paint. Hear that? It's kind of rough, kind of thirsty, kind of dry and rough, and very a little textured. So when you try and put that first layer of paint on, it kind of drags, it kind of goes on spotty. So to avoid that, I like to mix some paint with a little bit of water and paint the entire canvas. Now, because I'm doing a landscape, I'm going to say I'm going to put my horizon line somewhere around 1/3 of the way up. So I'm going to paint the top 2/3 of the canvas background color, a light blue, very light. You don't want anything dark, unless you do, because there's no rules in art. And then I'm going to go below that. It's going to be a little more on the beigey side. So to do that, first thing is you will never paint with a brush that's just dry out of the drawer. Always put it in some water, drag it on the side. In this case, I want it to have a fair bit of water still left in the bristles. So it's wet. See the drip, 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 drip. Okay. Now, I don't want to just paint it white. So I'm going to paint it a light blue. I put the corner of my brush with some blue, and then I'm just pulling some of the white into that little bit of blue until I get a light enough blue to make me happy, because I don't want it too dark at all. All right, so there we go. A little more white. Okay. So then I'm just going to cover the canvas. And it doesn't matter really what direction you go in. And when it gets dry, you can dip your brush in the water, back into the paint. You never go right from water to canvas. Water, palette to canvas. So this takes a little time, but you're just going to try and get a base layer on there. Sometimes I go in circles, sometimes I go, it doesn't really matter what direction you go in. See what I mean about the canvas being very thirsty? It really is very thirsty. So I have to move in front here just to get this. So I pull it this way a little bit. Get this side, but basically I'm not worrying about how I paint this on, just that I paint it on. All right, so I'm not sure how well you can see, but from here up, it's got a kind of a light blue. Now, I'm just going to take the corner. I'm not even washing my brush out, just dipping a tiny bit into that brown or raw umber, maybe a little bit more, because I want to muddy up that blue a little bit. And I'll need way more white. You're always reaching for the white, trust me, you just really are. So I'm basically doing a little bit of beige, but I don't ever like it strictly beige. I made sure I added some blue back in, so it's kind of a, looks like a bluey gray beige. And I'm just going to use that for the bottom. I can already see it's not very beigey, so there, add a little more beige. I'm going to turn it like this because I need to hold it still and get this paint on. So the only time you ever would paint this hard with the brush is for that first layer, because it's hard to get the paint into the grooves of that dry canvas, the very first layer, which is the main reason we're doing a first layer. So that you don't have to worry about what you're painting or why you're painting. You're just getting it on there like painting a wall. Makes an easy first step, and then you don't have a blank canvas staring at you. It's got something on it. So that's the first thing I do with not every canvas. Sometimes I don't bother, but I do find it helps the second layer go on a little sweeter, a little nicer. So that's got to dry for a bit. Dry, maybe dry. Okay, so for the next step, we're going to make a little more of that sky blue that's underneath, and also make sure we have some clean white. A palette knife is what you use to mix colors on a palette. So for sky blue, again, it's a minuscule amount of blue, a bunch of white. And then you just kind of use the back of the knife to pat that, mix that in. It's a little bit bright. I'm thinking I need all of the white, so I'll need more white again. That's okay. I got lots. That's why I buy lots of white, and I buy the cheaper paint in the white because I use so much of it. That's a hint. So I think I'm going to make a little bit of purple, which means a little magenta or red if that's what you're using, a little bit of blue. Now, if you're using red instead of magenta, you'll need a little less of it. Just mix those together till I see I got a nice purple, and that is kind of a nice purple. It's nice that it's a bit of a bluey purple, which is kind of what I was going for. And then I'm going to take some of this white. So the goal being 2 shades of blue, one a little more pinky, pure white. You're going to wipe off that knife to keep it clean for the next time you want to use it. Now, remember my little makeup brush? I'm going to take a makeup brush because I can. And I'm going to just put it in a little bit of paint. So the sky, I just don't want it to be a straight kind of color. So I'm just going to put some of this somewhere. And I'm just sort of going in circles and sort of making a little nice sky vibe. A little more down here. This is where a spray bottle is good. If I give that a little spray, it won't dry quite as fast. Maybe put some. So one thing you don't want to do with your colors in the sky is you don't want to make them too symmetrical or predictable. So with this brush, it's kind of fun. You can go almost in any direction, and it just kind of lends just a nice vibe to the sky. You can get it, you can haze it up a little bit by just going lightly. And that won't work if you don't spray it with water, by the way. With acrylics, like as soon as you put this on, pretty much it starts to get tacky. It's what we call tacky. So that's why you gotta spray it with water whenever you want. So I think that's enough of that color, and I'm gonna take now the purpley color. Didn't bother washing my brush. So now it just looks a little purpley. And I'm just gonna bring some purplies in there. And then I'm gonna haze them up a little bit. Bring some purple up here. Haze that up a little bit. By the way, it's really hard to paint like this. Normally I'm painting like this, but if I do that, I'm blocking your view. So I think I'm just gonna do this and spray. Because it was getting a little bit dry. I mean, I don't mind some abstraction in my landscapes. I don't mind if it's a little bit not too real looking, but I know a lot of people like it to be look a little real. And because we did that background color, a nice light sky blue, it doesn't matter if you cover everything with these colors at all. It does not matter. Oh, I'm really liking that purple. I really am. It's almost like a periwinkle blue. Very pretty. So already you can see how many shades of blues I got on there. They're fairly easily, right? It's not that hard. Now, again without washing, when you're doing a sky and you want it to blend, you don't necessarily need to wash out the brush between colors. So now I got a little bit of white on there. Now wherever it's already a bit lighter, I might bring in some of that white. You can do circles and that blends. This is the best blendy brush ever. So I'm gonna put some white maybe here, like some light in the center, and then I'm gonna go whoosh, whoosh. Now we're not going for kindergarten clouds. So, you know, the cotton batten that, you know, you go and you just make it look a piece of cotton batten. You're not really going for that. You're just going for the vibe of clouds. This is a beginner course. I mean, you can paint clouds 1,000 different ways, and there's different kinds of clouds, and there's all kinds of things. But for the purposes of a beginner course, we're just going to do some basic misty clouds up there. Put some down here. It's always good actually to paint with spray bottle in your left hand and brush in your right. A little bit of light up in here, I think. Yeah, I think that's a nice looking sky. Lighten it down here too. Isn't that pretty? It's a pretty sky. Always wash your brush out right away, which means aggressively bang it in the bottom of the water container. Get to be aggressive. So now for the land, because this is a beginner course, we're not going to go nuts. So, okay, we're just going to do a little bit of water. And we're going to use a 1-inch straight brush for that. Remember, you always put it in the water first. Drag it on the side. There it is. So since we got blues already, and whatever color is in the sky would reflect in the water. So we're going to take that sky blue, the first basic one that we had, and I'm going to say start maybe a river or lake in the background. And I'm using side to side strokes, like so. I didn't dry it quite as much as I should have. So I'm not worried about the edges of the little brook that I'm painting here. Not worried at all. I'm just, main thing is that it gets wider the closer it gets to the bottom of the canvas, because things that are closer to you are bigger than things that go into the distance. I'm going to define it more later, but that just basically shows me where the water is. And before that dries, I'm going to take some of this purple and work some of it in, because again, the sky colors would reflect in the water a little bit. And I'm also going to add a little add a little raw umber or brown into some of that purple. And I'm going to put a little beigey in that pond as well. Because if you look at a little river, it's going to be a little dirty looking. It's not going to look bright like the sky. It's going to have some darker. So I'm not obliterating all the blue I put on there, just getting a little bit on. And I'm doing more in the back part a little bit because it's further away, so it would be kind of visually dingier. So we're not detailing anything yet, just basics. Washing my brush. That's a good example of what, you know, a straight brush, a little straight brush would do. Okay, now I'm going to think about the green land. So we already have blue and white on our palette. I'm going to also add some yellow now, because yellow and blue makes green. In nature, nothing is just one shade. So I'm going to mix 2 or 3 colors of green. Green needs a lot more yellow than blue. Usually about 3/4 yellow and 1/4 blue will make a nice green. That's a pretty nice green. It's not a lot of it though. I think I need a little bit more. Okay. So now that I got that green, and it's a very nice green, if I do say so myself, pretty green, I'm going to take a bit of it and move it over. And I'm going to add some of this light blue to it. So then you'll notice I'm getting a nice light green. Then I'm going to take another little bit of that green and I'm going to add some brown to it so that I can get like a dirty green. And I'm also going to add a little pink, because pink and green are complementary colors, so that will, as you see, really brown it up. So there, 3 shades of green. I could probably even go 1 shade lighter. Since I got green on my knife, I might just put a little bit of green into some more white. So I got that one, that one, that one, and that one. I'm going to go dark first. I'm going to load my brush, which means get paint on both sides all the way up into the bristles. So you got lots of paint on there. And I'm just going to start down here with some darker green. And I'm doing it with the filbert. You can kind of do some natural sort of scrubbling sort of things. That looks kind of cool. I almost think abstract when I'm doing this, because you really don't need it to be like hyper realistic. In fact, I doubt you would be able to make it hyper realistic anyway, even if you really wanted to. So I'm just kind of making that stream kind of make sense. And you're putting a few juttings into the stream with horizontal lines, more or less. And the further you get back, the more important it is that the lines are kind of horizontal. I'm just doing that because the shoreline wouldn't be a straight line. So you want a little jagged. Now I'm going to go to the next color of green because it needs more water. See, sometimes I even forget. So we're going to take a different colored green and we're going to make some of that, sing a little bit. I'm just going to have some rolling hills over here. But I don't want to go up quite that far yet. You'll notice they're kind of blending together a bit as I'm going, and that was kind of intentional. Just because then you get, because nothing's ever one shade, so the more different shades you use of a color, the more sophisticated and real your picture is going to look. Again, mixing water into that green. Then I'm going to the lighter green, not the lightest, but the lighter. I'm going to create some of those rolling hills in the background. And filbert's nice to get those rounded shapes. There. So you'll see when I was doing the water, I was making sure to do all horizontal lines, but when I'm doing grass and stuff like that, not so much. And I'm not, because it's a beginner class, I mean, this would be my first pass. If I was painting a realistic painting, I would then go in and like hyper detail and do lots of other stuff to increase the realism. But for our beginner purposes, it's all good, man. It's all good. I think some of that blue underneath is wreaking havoc and blending with my green. That's okay. I don't mind that, actually. See, that stream is still wet, so it's mixing with the green and making it just look like it's part of the stream when it's supposed to be part of the... Yeah, that's better. I need more grass and less water here. So I'm actually going to put some of that light green in the background. I'm going to start with the farthest hills, and then we're going to go like that. So the light hits the top of the hills. So in nature, whenever something hits the top, so in nature, the light would hit the top. And the further away you got, the lighter it would be. So other than the fact that the river is too light, that is a good first layer for a landscape. So all we use to create this is a big chip brush, which is like a buck a piece, a 1-inch flat brush, and a filbert. So step 1 of a beginner landscape. Okay, so now for the next step, we have our foundational picture sort of painted. We just need to get some detail and have some fun. And this is when people can get like, I'm afraid to do it. Don't be afraid. It's all good. It's just art. It's not brain surgery. If you do something you don't like, nobody died. So that's like the number one thing that I really want to instill in all of my students is it's art. It's supposed to be fun. We don't have to white knuckle our paintbrushes. I see people like going, I'm like, oh, no. It's fun. But you have to let go of that task-oriented type A. Do it, tell me exactly how I have to do it, and I'll do it exactly that way or I'll get frustrated. We have to let go of that. Let it go. Let it go. Let it go. The goal is not to make it look exactly like mine or exactly like the person's beside you or the person across from you. The goal is to relax and have some fun and learn some good skills. And the more you paint, the more skills you get. It's really not magic. It's not rocket science. It's just the way we learn anything. And for some reason in our culture, when it comes to art, we just think, oh, I can't do it because I tried it 3 times. No, you just don't do it as well when you're first trying. And the more you do it, the better you get. And it's all good. It's supposed to be fun. So that's my little soapbox moment. So let's maybe paint a few evergreens in the distance. For that, we need the smaller filbert, this little guy. Okay, so the basics. We're going to start with brown. Nice damp brush. And I'm just going to get a little brown on there. And I'm just going to decide where these trees are going to live. And I'm just going to take my filbert and just... So I'm not going to like fill the landscape background with trees. We're just going to do a few little trees scattered. That's probably enough. Maybe put a few on the edge on this side. So I'm just kind of blocking in with the brown, the trunks. And well, after I do that, I'm going to create my shadows. So I'm going to just dip my brush in water. And then I kind of pat it in a fresh spot on my palette. So basically I'm just watering down the paint a little bit. Then I'm going to dab a little bit more of it off on a napkin, paper towel. So the goal is to not have as much paint and to have it a little bit more water in the mix of the paint. And so I'm just going to take the base of the tree and come out like this a little bit. And you'll notice right away when I do this, I'm kind of coming off and down and to the right. You can choose which direction that you just, as the painter of this universe, you can choose which way the light is shining and then which way the shadows would be on your picture. There we go. So that just gives you the, I was going to say stems. Could be stems if they were painting flowers, but that would be odd. So that could be the trunks. And then rinse out the brush. Okay, now we need to mix. Guess what? 2 or 3 shades of green. Okay, so I mixed a dark, really bluey green. Now, I am going to add a little trick for you. When you're creating something that exists in nature, It's not usually the vivid color that comes straight out of an acrylic paint tube or tub, depending on what you're using. So that's a little what we call high chroma, which means it's got too much color pigment and not enough neutral. And neutral pigments look more nature-esque. So we're going to add some neutral pigments into this deep green. When you add black and white or brown and white to a pigment, it gets a little grayer. It grays it down really nicely. Mixing color is a little more advanced than we can get beyond the scope of a quickie tutorial. All right, so I have my filbert, and I'm going to get some green on both sides of the brush. So I'm just getting the tops on there of some trees. And then I'm going to bring them down. Trickiest part is probably getting the top a little pointy. So you can just put the brush sideways and do the pointy top. And then once you get down a little ways, you can kind of go rock that brush side to side. Like so. Okay, so there's my little trees. So we're going to take our brush and you're going to put it this so you're not going to hold it like this. You're going to hold it this way and straight up, and you're going to dot, dot, and make the pointy top of the tree, of each tree. Once you do that, you're going to do just a very random little side, very gentle taps. And once you get down to the width of the brush, then you just kind of rock back and forth to create more of the tree. And you'll see I'm not trying to be careful. I'm just sort of getting it down there. Just like that. Finding the tree. Remember to do the tops. And they're all different heights. That's the other thing, that nature's not a very uniform thing oftentimes. So new painters sometimes make the mistake of sort of making something a little too perfect. Just like every tree isn't perfectly triangular. They're not all going to be the best candidates for Christmas trees. And you'll see I'm not fussing about it. I'm just getting them down there. But you know, you stand back, looks like trees in the distance, doesn't it? Except now I'm going to lighten some green quite a bit. Oops, there we go. And maybe add a little bit of some other color in there, maybe a little more yellow this time. Because guess what? Nothing in nature is one shade. So I'm going to wipe some of that excess paint off. I just want a little bit on the ends. I don't want too much on the brush. Now, still got too much, I think. I'll wipe it off a little bit. Okay, so now we're just going to just put a few, you know what? That's not quite light enough. See, the thing is, when you lighten a color, if you don't lighten it enough, then the eye won't perceive the difference. It's like, see, like you can't really tell I added. You can kind of tell, but from a distance you would never see. There, so I'm just gonna, trick with this is to just be sparing with it. And it's a very bright picture, so there'd be lots of sunlight. And remember, this is introduction to painting, so it's not meant to be a complex, perfect painting. I'm just adding. The other temptation sometimes is to almost cover too much of the original color. You're just accentuating, not covering. Okay, well, there we go. From a distance, we got some trees. Time for another sip. Cheers. So what I'm going to do now is a little trick that has to do with cohesion or cohesiveness of a painting. So that blue-green or those greens are not really the same greens as the ground because they're more bluey, which is cool and fine, but I want more of that sludgy green in the river because most creeks and rivers have a lot of mud in them, right? I'm just going until I get a color I like that I think would look good in the pond. But I don't want it too dark. I'm going to put a little bit lighter green in there. There we go. I'm going to use a smaller flat brush like that. Just because I want to be able to. I'm also going to make the paint a little bit wetter with my trusty spray bottle. I'm actually getting quite a few spritzes, and I'm going to stir that water in because I want the more water you mix with the paint, the more transparency you get. So it won't look as drastic when you put it on top of the other colors that are in the river. Especially if you dab it off on your towel or your paper towel first, so there's not as much paint on that little brush. So you're just taking this faded sort of wet color, and I'm going to put a lot of it in the edges of the pond and out. Now, a trick with blending is to take a damp sponge, which I happen to have, and just pull over like this. So you'll see how that, hopefully you can see how that settled it up. All I'm doing is taking artistic license and darkening some areas. You'll notice I'm mostly using horizontal strokes because water basically, when light hits it, gravity seems to settle water in horizontal lines. There. So now I want to make it darker. And for that, I need a lot more brown or raw umber if you're paying attention. All right, so I ended up with that really nice dark green that hopefully you can see there. That I'm basically going to hold my brush like this. And now what I'm trying to do is create some shadows and some accents in the river. So my thought process is I'm trying to go underneath those little parts that jut out for sure to create some of the shadows. We will detail the bank, but we kind of have to detail the water first because it's the bank sits on top of it, doesn't it? Using some of the purple from the sky mixed with some of that green now. I'm just adding a little more bluey highlights to that water. And I like this flat brush for that because I can just kind of go side to side. And again, notice every brush stroke I use, every brush stroke I'm using is horizontal in the water. So basically I just added some white to what I already had. Now I'm taking that same brush because it's square and flat. On the end is a nice convenient straight line. So I hold the brush that way in the horizontal orientation, and I'm just going to put some white horizontal highlights in that water. And you can go back and forth a little bit, but again, you're not trying to obliterate all the other colors, you're just augmenting. I added more blue and brown to that green I already had because it doesn't seem very dark and I want some shadows. So I put some dark on, and then I'm going to kind of pull it with the damp sponge like so. So you'll notice how that really looks like a shadow. One on this side, one under this. So what makes it more 3D is this addition of shadows. So anywhere where the land's above and the light's that way. So I'm putting it on the underside of everywhere it juts out or kind of juts out. So one thing that you may not know is that yellow is a very transparent color. So I'm going to take, maybe I finally found a use for the round brush. Wet it first, and I'm going to just put it in some yellow. And then from there, find one of my greens that's kind of light, and just mix that in, because what I want is a really yellowy green right now. One of the things I feel like when I'm looking at the painting, it looks kind of like all cool color, not a lot of warmth. Yeah, get a nice yellowy, sunshiny color. Make it a little lighter by putting a little bit of that light green in. Use that instead of white because I don't want it drastically lighter, just a little bit. And add some water. You'll see me adding water a lot. And when I'm talking to new painters, the number one thing is you gotta use water in with your paint, which you would never do if you were painting a wall. So I get why people wouldn't think of it. Okay, so now we're going to take this. I'm going to roll it on my towel so there's not as much paint. And I'm going to get my spray can handy, spray bottle. And I'm just going to put it in this eye pathway, leading that towards that pretty sky. And mostly near that. And I'm going to just move it a little bit with my fingers. So just on some of these. So if you need to spray it, you can, but you can try and I'm just trying to settle it up on, especially on the side, and move it around a bit. I tend to use my finger, and you see how that all of a sudden brings the eye now to the edge. It's like it's directing the eye, showing it what to look at. Because you're really drawn to that, aren't you? And I'm going to put some of it in here too, just so it doesn't look like it's just that one thing. There we go. Put a little up in here too. It's like the sun's just kissing that. And that's just maybe me. Maybe if you were looking at something real, you wouldn't see that yellow, but I kind of like it. Kind of gives it a little character. Now, all I'm going to do, I know this is a simple painting, but guys, one of the worst things you can do if you ever do want to paint realistically is start with something with a lot of elements. You just want to learn to paint a sky, you want to learn to paint a river, you're learning to paint rolling hills, and you're learning to paint trees in the distance. You don't want to overcomplicate things. Now, if I had more time and I wanted to do a longer tutorial, I might put a tree in the foreground and bring it up, because I like to paint trees just to give it some more interest. Might put a person sitting on the bank of the river. I'd probably draw more grasses. I mean, we can do that actually. That could be a good last step. But yeah, you could draw some grasses. So for grass, you need a liner, which is just a really fine, long bristled brush. Make sure you get it wet. At this point, you should have plenty of greens to pick from on your palette. Whatever's there, use it. So I'm just going to roll that in the paint. That's just luscious, but I don't think it's going to be wet enough. So actually, in general, I'm just going to spritz my entire palette. So to keep all those nice greens viable, I'm going to mix some of that water in with this green, so it's a little more fluid. And when you're using a liner, you're going to pull up, and the further you go up, the more you pull away from the canvas. So you start like that. So you can go up or down. You can maybe experiment and figure out which one you like. And I'm just picking kind of random spots and just drawing some of these tall grasses. Of course, they won't be as tall if they're back here, remember? That one obviously did get tall. That's really wasn't my intent, but I'm actually going to make a few of these a little more thick. There we go. All my thick ones go this way. Isn't that funny? So I'm just going to put a thick one that way and a thick one this way. Now, I'm not even going to bother washing up my brush. I'm just going to go into this other green. And the same places, so it's like just different shades of green. And you'll get good with a liner brush. If you practice long enough, you can literally just go flick, 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 flick. And it's all good. This paint's a little dry, but I'm not going to worry about it at this point. All right. Now maybe some of the bright green if I can rescue it. At the bottom, I just kind of mess it up a little bit. And if it's too extreme, remember that damp sponge? Just kind of give it a little, blend it in. That's a little trick. To blend wet paint on top of dry paint can sometimes be tricky, so that's a little trick for you. The last thing you always should do, and you always should, is put your initials on your painting. L, G. All right, bye.